Have you ever wondered what could cause brother to fight against brother, a nation to be torn in two? As we journey back to the 19th century United States, we find a society seething with deep political and social tensions. The fabric of the nation, stitched together with threads of unity and shared ideals, was fraying at the edges, strained by the weight of a contentious issue: slavery. The United States, in its youth, was a land of contrasts. The North, teeming with factories and bustling cities, was a beacon of industrialization. It was here, amid the clatter of machinery and the hum of progress, that the notion of a free workforce, unshackled by the chains of slavery, began to take root. Meanwhile, the South, with its vast plantations and slower pace of life, clung to a way of life deeply entwined with the institution of slavery. The South's agrarian economy relied heavily on the labor of enslaved people, making the prospect of abolition not just a moral question, but an economic one. As the divide between these two halves of the nation deepened, two factions emerged, each championing a different vision for the future of the United States. On one side were the Confederates, the Southern states led by Jefferson Davis. They ardently believed in their right to secede from the Union and to preserve their way of life, including the institution of slavery. On the other side were the Unionists, the Northern states rallying behind President Abraham Lincoln. They sought to maintain the Union at all costs, and were increasingly committed to the cause of abolishing slavery. In this cauldron of tension and ideological conflict, the stage was set for a showdown. The question of slavery, the rights of states, the very essence of freedom and unity, all these were issues that the United States grappled with. And these unresolved questions, simmering beneath the surface, were about to erupt into a conflict that would shake the very foundations of a young nation. The stage was set for a conflict that would shake the very foundations of a young nation. The flames of conflict were fanned when Abraham Lincoln, a man from the North, ascended to the presidency. The year was 1860, a year that would cast a long, divisive shadow over the United States. Abraham Lincoln, a man known for his opposition to the expansion of slavery, was elected as the nation's leader. This event marked a pivotal moment in the nation's history, a moment that would alter the course of the United States forever. Lincoln's election didn't sit well with the South. They saw him as a threat to their way of life, to their economy, and most importantly, to the institution of slavery. Fearful of Lincoln's intentions, and convinced that the federal government was overstepping its bounds, 7 Southern states decided to take drastic action. They declared their secession from the Union, a move that was both controversial and unprecedented. South Carolina was the first to secede in December of 1860, swiftly followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. These states banded together to form a new nation, the Confederate States of America. They elected their own president, Jefferson Davis, a man who shared their belief in the right to secession and the preservation of slavery. The formation of the Confederate States was a direct challenge to the authority of the Union. It was a bold assertion of the states' rights doctrine, a belief that the individual states should have greater power than the federal government. But more than that, it was a defiant stand against the tide of change that was sweeping the nation. The South was not just seceding from the Union, they were drawing a line in the sand, a line that marked the divide between the old ways and the new, between the agrarian, slave-owning South and the industrialized abolitionist North. Fueled by fear and defiance, the South was ready to fight for what they believed was their right to self-determination. The stage was set for a clash of ideals, a battle for the soul of a nation. The tipping point had been reached and the American Civil War was about to begin. The spark that ignited the powder keg of tension was the attack on Fort Sumter. In the early dawn of April 12, 1861, a single shot broke the silence over the waters of Charleston Harbor. This marked the beginning of a war that would forever change the United States. Fort Sumter, located on an island in South Carolina, was a federal outpost in the heart of Confederate territory. It stood as a symbol of the Union's presence in the South, a constant reminder of the divide that had torn the nation apart. The newly formed Confederate States of America, under the leadership of Jefferson Davis, saw the occupation of Fort Sumter as a direct challenge to their sovereignty. As negotiations between the North and South failed, the Confederacy decided to take action. In the early hours of that fateful day, Confederate forces, under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard, opened fire on the fort. For 34 hours, the skies were lit with the blaze of cannon fire. Despite the intensity of the attack, remarkably, no lives were lost during the bombardment. The Union troops, led by Major Robert Anderson, were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. They held their ground as best they could, but were forced to surrender on April 13th. The fall of Fort Sumter was a significant victory for the Confederacy, bolstering their morale and resolve. The attack on Fort Sumter sent shockwaves across the nation. It marked the transition from political tension to open conflict. President Abraham Lincoln, recognizing the gravity of the situation, issued a call to arms. He requested 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, a call that was met with a fiery response from both the North and South. In the North, Lincoln's call stirred a wave of patriotism. Thousands answered the call, ready to fight to preserve the Union. In the South, it was seen as a declaration of war, pushing more states to join the Confederacy. With the first shots fired, there was no turning back. The American Civil War had begun. The battle for union was underway, a struggle that would test the resolve of the nation and its people, ultimately defining the course of American history. In the midst of the bloodshed, a decisive battle unfolded at Gettysburg. In July of 1863, the normally quiet town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, became the stage for one of the most significant battles of the American Civil War. The Union forces, led by Major General George G. Meade, faced off against the Confederate forces under General Robert E. Lee. Over the course of 3 grueling days, the Union forces managed to repel the Confederate offensive. Despite being heavily outnumbered, they held their ground, turning the tide of the war in favor of the Union. The Battle of Gettysburg, one of the bloodiest in American history, resulted in approximately 51,000 casualties. Yet, it served as a beacon of hope for the Union, signaling a shift in momentum. In the same year, another monumental event took place. On January 1st, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This historic document declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are, and henceforward shall be free. While it didn't immediately end slavery, it fundamentally transformed the character of the war. The Emancipation Proclamation reframed the conflict from a fight to preserve the Union into a battle for human freedom. It gave the Union a moral cause to rally behind, and it sent a clear message to the world. The United States was committed to ending slavery. This proclamation also allowed African Americans to join the Union Army and Navy, providing crucial manpower in the continuing struggle. The Battle of Gettysburg and the Emancipation Proclamation were pivotal moments in the American Civil War. They marked a turning point in the war, shifting the balance of power and reframing the purpose of the conflict. As we look back at these events, we see not only the horrors of war, but also the enduring human spirit, the relentless pursuit of freedom, and the resilience of a nation divided. The Battle of Gettysburg marked a turning point in the war, and the Emancipation Proclamation brought a new moral dimension to the conflict. They served as catalysts for change, steering the United States onto a path towards unity and freedom. The war came to an end, but the nation was deeply scarred and divided. This marked the beginning of an era of Reconstruction, a period that would challenge the resilience of the American people as they sought to heal the wounds inflicted by a brutal and bloody conflict. The war's conclusion saw the abolition of an institution that had cast a long, dark shadow over the nation's history: slavery. With the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865, the shackles of bondage were shattered. This monumental change marked a critical step towards equality, but the path ahead was far from smooth. The newly freed individuals faced a host of challenges as they sought to navigate their way through a society that was reluctant to accept their newfound status. The victorious North faced the daunting task of post-war reconstruction, a process that was as much about rebuilding the physical infrastructure as it was about mending the social and political fabric of the nation. The scars of the conflict ran deep, leaving a society that was fragmented and polarized. This period was marked by a struggle for power and control, as the North sought to implement its vision of a reunited and restructured nation, while the South fought to preserve its culture and way of life. The human cost of the war was staggering. Lives had been lost on an unprecedented scale, families torn apart, and communities devastated. The echoes of this loss would reverberate through the generations, shaping the narrative of the nation for years to come. The American Civil War also left a lasting impact on civil rights and equality issues in the United States. It set the stage for the civil rights movement, a struggle that would continue to challenge the nation's conscience and redefine its understanding of freedom and equality. The American Civil War, a battle for union and freedom, left a lasting imprint on the nation, shaping its future in ways unimaginable. This conflict, born out of division, ultimately served to redefine the essence of the Union, laying the groundwork for a future that held the promise of a more equal and just society.